The following is a conversation with Samantha Jewel. Samantha is a pioneer in soil carbon and sustainable agriculture with nearly 3 decades of experience tackling one of humanity's most critical challenges: how to nurture the soil beneath our feet while addressing global climate issues. As a founder of Earth.io, she has created innovative pathways for farmers to engage in carbon credits, making sustainability a viable option for their livelihoods. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Sid Bensalah. Today, we'll uncover soil's profound role in our ecosystems, human health, and athletic performance. Samantha, it's great to have you with us today.
And lovely to be here.
So, your story begins in food and agriculture, but expands into the broader world of sustainability and advocacy. What first inspired you to focus on soil, health, and sustainable agriculture?
In 1997, you will recall the outbreak of mad cow in England, where they had to kill all the animals. My family created the first restaurant chain in 1965. I literally grew up in food. So I've been around food all my life. And at that time, I was probably managing 3 restaurants, executive management, executive HR for 20 years, and 500 staff under me. We were feeding 50,000 customers a week, and I was pregnant with my first child. And I wasn't having problems yet, but I was kind of became like, what are they doing feeding a cow meat? I don't know anything about farming, but that's got to be the craziest thing I've ever heard. So I just went, well, look, if they're doing that in England, and, you have this sort of image, I suppose, of other countries. There's sort of little things, like Germany's Mercedes-Benz. England was always green rolling hills and apples and, everything very bucolic. So the idea that they were doing something so insane, and I was like, that's just crazy. I've got to look this up. And about the same time as I started researching it, I went through everything in our restaurants, because I started worrying, well, we're so laid back in Australia. It's going to be a lot worse here, because we just go, yeah, sure, we're right, mate, no problem. And we don't really think about those things. We're not like the Americans, rah, get out there, protest, passionate, all that sort of stuff. We're too chill. So I decided to take it on myself to look at it. And my father had come from 4 or 5 generations of farming in Midwest Kansas. So he'd grown up during the time, well, not him, but his parents, through the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. And he knew that was as a result of the children of the farms being sent to agricultural school and coming back with all these new ideas, which had actually destroyed the soil to the extent where that's where the Dust Bowl occurred. And they'd actually brought the military in, of all things, to try and fix the soil, because it caused famine and the stock market crash, et cetera, et cetera. So he had this overriding viewpoint, having grown up on these farms in Midwest Kansas. His forefathers were the first founding farmers in the area. And because of that Dust Bowl and sheer poverty, they were the first to discover no-till farming, because they didn't have any money to plant anything. And in the following year, they hadn't even moved the stubble. When they did put something in, theirs was the only crop that grew in the region. And that was because they hadn't turned anything. So they have never tilled the land since, and they're still there now. One of only 3 founding families in the middle of America in Goodland, Kansas, farming still. But, there's more to it than no-till, as I have learned and since gone back and tried to talk to them. Very hard to change farmer when you're not a farmer. Anyway, so because of that, he gave me free range to look at everything. So I wrote to all the suppliers of the restaurants, and I said, well, of all the food coming into the restaurants, and said, what is in your product that we get from you? And, they gave me all their ingredients, but I'd already discovered at this point GMOs, and I'd say, well, you list sugar, for instance, which is in so many things. And did you know that sugar, from the sugar board they use this GMO to extract the molasses. So here you think the brown sugar is the healthier one, but they're dumping all this genetically modified enzyme into the brown sugar. And I just started saying, do you know you got sugar? And they'd say, no. So I'd send them the document. They'd ask me for the
Mm-hmm.
document. And I'd say, well, you are unwittingly having traces of GMOs in your product because you're using this and you don't know about it. And so at the time, because I was doing all this research and seeing that there was this real lack of knowledge, and I'm talking big industry, the Pepsis and Cokes and the everything, every supplier that brought something into us, I researched them and wrote to them, and this is from about 99. So I was already doing it for 2 years. So there's about this time I'm starting to research it. And I've had my first child and I've had problems with the birth. And I've started going, why would I have problems with the birth? I'm from a mother that could barely get to the hospital to give birth within an hour. Like she just had the easiest births in the world. And so I ended up with 2 cesareans and all
Wow.
these problems. And I'm going, I've eaten so healthy. My parents were on vitamins in the 60s, brown rice, everything made from scratch. Like there was no reason. I mean, even rainwater, we had rainwater tanks in Adelaide where we started. And I just thought, this doesn't make any sense. And so I was kind of going down a rabbit hole that I've never come out of. And in that journey, I just learned so much about food and agriculture and, all the toxins they're now talking about. They're now quite commonplace for everybody. So the only thing that was around that had any vetting of that was organic. And so I tried to introduce organics into the family restaurant in 99, 2000. And it was very difficult because we were serving too many people for what the organic industry was geared for serving the family home with a block of butter this big, and we needed 25 kilos. Like they just didn't have anything to cross over. And we weren't big like a McDonald's, even though we were before McDonald's even knew about Australia, we were going here. So we were really early. And like everything, I was ahead of the curve. And so I was trying to put stuff in and I was trying to get, like I'd even go to the conferences, or my parents supported me to travel all over the world, go to all the international conferences on organics and learn about all this stuff. And even they wouldn't have me speak because I was not speaking to a community they were kind of like, oh, you must be part of the enemy. Like we're this very tight-knit little group that's all about the little guy. And so there's a lot of crossovering that I have been doing since I started getting into that. That was a long story, wasn't it, to say how I got
No,
into
it's
this
very
soil thing.
interesting.
The soil became the key thing. So in 2005 or 6, there was one of these conferences I was at, the International Forum for Organic Agriculture Movement, IFOAM, and the keynote speaker stood up in front of all these farmers and said, you guys are the single greatest solution to climate change. And we were like, what? What's climate change? We really was very early on in this time and certainly didn't realize soil was the solution to it. And he said, well, you're putting carbon in the ground, you guys. And so that was like a light bulb moment for me because I was getting so sick of the infighting in this small-minded thinking within all the different paradigms, organic, permaculture, biodynamic, like so many ways to skin a cat. And I wanted to say, look, you all want healthy soil. Why are you all complaining about how you get there? Like everyone was holding on to their little niche so tightly. So I just thought this is the best thing. And so I just flipped my entire focus, which was still about human health and, childhood health and mental health and all these things that I was seeing this tremendous spike, particularly in America. It's called stats come out of America. And I was kind of going, well, that looks insane, but who knows what they're doing around here? Because obviously that's my experience in writing to the businesses. I found they didn't know either. So you realize there's this massive disconnect between what's actually going on and what we're all putting inside our bodies. And I just went, I can't fight everybody on this thing. What can I focus on? So I stuck to carbon. And that's really why I ended up down this journey is with soil carbon, because it actually solves every problem that I've just touched on, which sounds wild.
Hold on. You said so many interesting stuff, but let me take you back. You said earlier that you introduced organic product within the
Yes.
restaurant. What was the feedback at that time, Samantha?
Well, nobody wanted to pay more
Hmm.
for it.
Was it
And,
expensive?
so oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of the items would be 6, 7 times the
Okay.
cost of
Yeah.
conventional,
Yeah.
and particularly at scale. So we were looking for something we could put in that we could afford to. In the end, we did an ice
Hmm.
cream that we had them make just for us, and it cost us $100,000 extra for the year, which we did not pass on to the customer. And that was kind of our, what do you call it, loss leader. And look, it was funny because people just would just accept it, like they didn't get the significance of what that was. They was just like, then we'd get, oh, the whole restaurant's
And
organic.
was it
And
easy
you
to
go, oh,
explain to the clients and
what?
customer the benefit
No,
or no? So
no,
they looked at just
they
the
didn't want to
wallet,
know.
that this is way too, yeah.
Totally, totally. And not just the wallet. It's like, we're a pancake restaurant, and so there are people going there for sweets
Mm.
and desserts and go to the movies, and they don't want to know
Yeah.
about all that.
Yeah.
Maybe families with small babies. And it was kind of why I got into, I sort of started thinking, well, the only people that are interested are mothers who suddenly had this epiphanic moment of, I'm growing a child, this real live thing that's going to come out of
Mm.
me, and I'm responsible for its whole life. Shit, what am I doing? And I think that's still
Mm.
remains the time. Like, I tried addressing children and parents with children when I call the age of the immortals, when they're about 9 to before they get puberty. It's sort of like 10 or 12. There's this curiosity point where their intellect is enough to sort of like really start reaching
Mm.
out and being very curious, and then they haven't turned to the opposite sex yet. So that was kind of like so I wrote three books actually for
Hmm.
children, for 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 13 plus, and I put them out in 2006.
Yeah.
And I put them into 7 languages. I went all over the world. I tried, but
Yeah.
I
We
think
will come back to
marketing's
the
my,
books, Samantha, later on.
yep,
My
that's
other
fine.
questions, and you said that when you started attending those conferences, they wouldn't let you speak. Now,
No, they never let me
yeah, now
speak.
the audience, they might questioning themselves, why? Because she's a woman, or because the agenda was already
Because
set?
the only people speaking were farmers or
Hmm.
academics, maybe shops. But I was a restaurant
Mm.
with 50,000 customers. I was the Antichrist. I'm like all the bad people, all the agrochemical companies, like, they didn't get that this could be not a corporation, but a family business
Hmm.
that was from farming, that was genuinely interested in humanity. That's just too much stuff. You got to remember, we had the recognition of
Mm.
McDonald's. We were there before McDonald's. So people assumed, I had people tell me, oh, you've got 50,000 shops, don't you? We had 9. And it was like, we had such a wide, everybody I've ever walked up to will tell you about their story being in one of our
Hmm.
restaurants, because they did their first date, they had their first job, they had their whatever,
Mm.
their first children's party. Because we cater from babies to grandparents and
Mm.
everything in between. And there is no age group that didn't go to
Mm.
us. So very difficult to get people to understand that we weren't the Antichrist. We're really very much on their side. I think I had one person stand up in a conference. Finally, after badgering for months, I convinced one of the conveners at iPhone to let me
Hmm.
speak to this little tiny auditorium. And somebody at the back stood up and clapped me and said, thank you for doing
Mm.
this. I was like, finally, somebody
Yeah.
gets it. I've been doing it
Yeah.
for years and years and years at that point.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's not because I'm a woman. It was just because I didn't have a degree after my name. I wasn't an
Yeah.
academic. I wasn't the genuine article out there. Even now in LinkedIn, they're all farmers. Oh, you're not a farmer. You can't know anything about food. Or, like, it's just, I don't fit in the
Yeah.
box,
Yeah.
and why are you doing it? Who's paying you? I've done this all on
Mm.
my own. I've not been paid by
Yeah.
anybody. I've done it because I'm passionate about it. And so you go,
Mm. And what was the turning point that made you dedicate your life to sustainability?
well, see, it's not sustainability. For me, it's human survival. I don't, sustain means to keep as is. I think it's the wrong word. We're talking about human survival. I had children. I was pregnant. I wanted my children to survive. And even now, my children who are now in their 20s, because this is almost 30s, that even now they, like I see them in their 20s and mid-20s now, and I've seen several of them have got really major body problems that I wouldn't have seen until people were in their 40s or so. Like they've got major hormone issues. And I've since gone on and done women's health, botanical medicine with Yale-trained doctors. I mean, I've done a lot of research, and it's commonplace. And this, you can date track it to the introduction of glyphosate in agriculture in the late 70s through 90s. And you see a spike in all these things that have occurred. And now they've got, we're going to have case studies, you're going to have peer reviewed. That's just all noise to stop the fact that nobody wants to stop doing it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the soil carbon. Soil carbon is often called a hidden solution to climate challenges. While it might not grab headlines like renewable energy, its role in environmental stability is massive. Let's unpack why that is. Why is soil carbon so vital in combating climate change, Samantha?
Well, it's all over the planet. Well, it's not all over the planet, but it's certainly that which we depend on to eat. To eat, to clothe ourselves. At some point, if you eat, you're involved with the soil. And we have evolved with the microbes that are in the soil. So everyone talks about leaky gut and all these things. That's all because of the soil. So we're losing topsoil. Everyone goes, what does that mean? So blah, blah, blah. Well, because it means the nutrients aren't there. And to get to your sports point and high-end success, if you don't have the building blocks to create life, whether it's a baby or a high-end athlete, you've got to take them supplementally, and you'll never get them in the delicate orchestra or ratio that the soil provides it and the microbial universe does in a healthy soil. Because the thing I think people miss with microbes and soil is the reason that it is life itself. And like everything in life, there is equilibrium playing out. Too much, too little. Like the pandemic thing was like, as a person who's studying microbes since the early 2000s, I'm like, this is insane, everybody. Some few people will die, yes, but organisms, they learn to adapt. That's what they're doing. They're constantly fighting for survival, and the weaker ones die out and the stronger ones live on. And you can't just pander to let's put a lid on it. It's going to get out, and we are going to not be wiped out. You might maybe isolate for a little bit, but the body is trying to find equilibrium, and the soil has that in it.
Yeah.
And you can look at it at so many different levels of paradigms. If you let a paddock be full of weeds, you might say, yeah, but all these thistles will take over. But the thistle is a pioneer plant that is bringing in nutrients that are missing in the soil because it's been denuded. So you have like the first thing you'll see if you drive along and you see someone's turned all the soil over and done a building site, and it's all mud everywhere. The first thing that'll happen will be those ugly thistles come up everywhere. That's the weeds putting the soil in, because life wants to occur. And if you can manage to get some animals moving across that, or some, like crush that, not kill it or take it off, that's precious. You go and then what's called crimping, where you crush it all back into the soil with animal hooves or whatever you want to do. That's putting that nutrient back in, and then the next species will come along, and the next. And that's why it's such a critical point.
So let's explain the process to our listeners on a very simple way. We know that post World War II, we've been injecting chemicals and fertilizers to our soils. And here we're talking about healthy soils. Can you explain, Samantha, is it easy, is it complicated to clean up that polluted soil?
Well, that's a bit like a piece of strings. It depends on how polluted it is. It depends on what sort of geological state you're in and what sort of climate you're in. So, for instance, the drier it is, the longer it'll take, because there's no water moving the system along. The hotter it is, it'll actually slow it down. There's a certain perfect Goldilocks, perfect
Mm-hmm.
temperature, rain, everything, where it speeds along pretty quickly. But, you can do it, and animals are really the critical thing for doing that transition, particularly the cow, because it's got this fermenting machine going on in it with its 4 stomachs. So it's putting compost out as it moves, turning it into the ground. Like, it's just such a perfect machine there. And so, yes, in some instances, it's pretty easy, but it really depends on how poisoned and denuded it is. But I cover all of this in my book. Couldn't just throw it out there again.
Yeah.
Carbon, it's not a dirty word. And it's a very simple book. I'm not going to give you a plug.
We will talk
but
about that. Yeah.
I'm just saying it in a nutshell. No, it's not difficult, but it really depends on what state your land is in. And I'm not the farmer or the agronomist or the lab technician or any of those things that you can use to get an idea of where your state of soil is at. But to give you a simpler way of looking at it, we emit 40 gigatons of carbon a year as a species per year. We can put the land, and we only, I should have it here. No, I'd give you this. You imagine an A4 piece of paper. It was about this big, right? If you fold it in half and fold it in a quarter, that's a quarter of it. There's only a quarter of an A4 piece of paper that is land. 3/4 of it is ocean. Of that 3/4, if you put a business card in the corner, that's all the land we can grow food on. And if you take that business card and fold that into thirds, 1/3 of that business card is all we can grow crops on. So 2/3 is animals that we can eat moving across the land. So if we don't have domesticated animals for us to eat protein, you can't turn it all into protein with crops, because you have to kill everything else to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Does that make more sense? And the plant and photosynthesis is what gets the carbon out of the atmosphere and back into the ground. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, it does.
So I think I finished it. 70. We can do 70. Did I say that? We can do 70 gigatons per annum. Like, we can do double the amount we emit just through that agriculture if we turned it around and did what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. To close up on that topic, for skeptics who might see soil as just dirt, how do you make the case of its importance?
Well, I think it really depends on where that person is at. So if they're a business person sitting in the city, they're going to look at it like, well, anything that you're talking about is irrelevant to me. I can just eat Doritos, and you're talking about a tax, which I don't want to pay. If you're talking about a farmer, they're going to say, well, I'm already trying to get good carbon, because that means I'm going to get, good results with yield. So I think it really just depends on where the person is at that you're speaking to. And if you were to tell me exactly what your market is, I could say what that answer was. So there isn't one simple answer for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about Earth.io. What inspired you to create it, and what problem were you trying to solve?
Originally I was trying to provide a very simple connection point, like a trading platform between the farmer and the consumer. But when I went into doing that, that's effectively called retail trade, and it's got so many regulations around it. It becomes easier to transact $200,000 than it does $2. So there's so many rules and regulations, particularly in Australia, that and also I couldn't find the interest. Like, people would say they're interested, and they wouldn't even put $10 down. So I just moved from being a trading platform to being an advisory service, whether it's for the farmer who doesn't know anything about what a soil carbon is and how they can make money off it, or a business that has to meet their ESG goals, and obviously the E is what I deal with, is the environment, but also the social aspect. I mean, we've got mass exodus from the land into the cities. We've got so many social issues about migration that will occur, what they call climate refugees, that is going to happen if we don't do things with that around the soil. I mean, just simple things. The soil has the ability to hold 4 to 6 times more water, to be resilient to climate change, to stop flood and fire and famine. I mean, I could just go on. Obviously
Yeah.
just go on.
How does your solution empower farmers to adopt sustainable practices through carbon credits?
Because I work with my other business partners, I've got two sides of me. I've got absolutely wonderful educators that just all they live for is to go onto the
And
farm
talk to
and
them.
teach the
Yeah.
farmer, talk to them, teach them how to do it, but also to measure their carbon, show them what they could do to tweak what they're doing right now that will improve the carbon, create all these wonderful things, but also then to legitimize what that carbon measurement is through separate auditing, etc., and then put it into a digital format to then trade into the international markets. So that I have trading partners now rather than trying to do it myself. But so really I'm the bridge between all of those things, and I facilitate and organize and get those things. But the biggest part is really to get the concept of a soil carbon credit being the solution to the climate, really, more than anything. Way above carbon capture,
Yeah.
way above all
Yeah.
those
And
things.
and is it an easy process for the farmers to take part to this kind of programs?
The thing is getting them, it's very difficult to get them to
Okay.
understand it. It's like, that's why the book is, I have to say, my biggest heartfelt thing that I had happen was that I was on a plane coming back to from one of these farm expos that I'd spent an enormous amount of money on to present and take staff up and do uniforms and backdrops and pay for it and all that sort of stuff. And I was on this plane and I've been trying to sell my new book, and I gave him the book, and he said, because I didn't have any way of doing anything, and he said, I haven't read a book in 30 years, but I'm about to see the head of the Sugar Association in a couple of days, and they're a very, very tight knit closed group. And he said, if you can say what you just said to me, or this book explains it, I'll give it to him. And I said, okay. And anyway, he rang me, and I said, I'm told it's about a 4-hour read, and it's very simple, because I tried to make it very simple. And he rang me and he said, I'm halfway through. I can't believe it. And I've only been 2 hours. Anyway, it took a little bit longer to read the last part, but then he did ring me and say, I have to tell you, not only thank you for writing that book, he said, I didn't think in my whole life in farming that I could have a different viewpoint about the land. And he said, I learned something about it. I didn't think that was possible. So that just made me cry. I was just so touched by it, because that's everything to me, that my book could communicate that, because you never know when you write something if it's too wordy.
That's yeah, it's a really nice story. Samantha, you talk a lot to farmers. You try to boost the awareness in regards to clean soil. You go to conferences. You explain the first time when you attended those conferences, they didn't let you speak. What's the biggest barrier in reducing reliance on chemicals in agriculture?
Cost. It's cost.
Because chemicals is quick,
Like,
let's say quick fix.
well, because they're paid. They've got to remember it's a business at the end of the day, and the farmer is paid on different metrics to what you or I think they're paid on. So, for instance, I was trying to sell an irrigation product, which I thought was really good, and the farmer told me, I'm paid on weight. He was growing leeks, vegetable farmer, and he had access to a lot of water, and this was a product that reduced the amount of water you needed to use and made the plant actually take the water up even more. And he was very excited about that, because it literally doubled the size of his leeks, and it was just a wavelength technology. And you could see the carbon forming around the roots, which weren't like it was going black. It was red earth. And he did nothing other than this wavelength. And I thought, then he came down and gave me the leeks. It was during COVID. So, and I thought the most tasteless, terrible leeks in the world, because all he'd done was increase the water. And I thought, well, that's what he's paid on. That's all that matters to him. The taste isn't relevant to him. He's not a gourmet vegetable grower. He's a bulk vegetable grower. And so, most people are about just filling their bellies, or what is the cost they're going to get, or, I mean, you're in the nutrition space, and I am too, because I'm interested in all these other things that nutrition does. But the big barrier is, what is the person paid on? And they're paid on yield, volume, into the commodity markets, how cheap they do. They're competing on a global market against slave labor. Like, we're very expensive labor here because we've only got 26 million people. A lot of farmers during COVID, because we don't have the itinerant tourist trade doing picking, the fruit just rotted on the ground.
Wow.
Nobody to pick it.
Wow.
We had businesses going under. That vegetable grounds, he lost 20 million.
It's a huge waste.
Huge waste. You just can't even begin to think. So they're not going to take risks.
So
you're not going to say, if you do this and this, you might get this money under a government protocol, when the government could change their mind within 4 years. So, or 2 years, or whatever the political thing is in your region. So it's very difficult to get a farmer to change, because you're asking them to change what they're doing. And that is a risk. They're gambling with millions of dollars of agricultural costs.
So
they can't risk.
Cost is a factor. How about the policies and the regulations?
Well, they're not supporting them. None of the like right now, there's a protest in the UK because they've put in an inheritance tax. So that's
led by
that's
Jeremy
nuts,
Clarkson.
Well, he's protesting it, I'm sure, because it's crazy, because they're barely surviving as it is. Most of the farmers are not surviving because of more and more rules and regulations, which are just set to thwart the poor farmer. And then they're saying what your children, who already, I've had farmers say, I wouldn't let my child come and work on my farm. Don't want them to have to work like a slave like this. It's not fun being a farmer anymore. It's hard to make ends meet. There's 2 per day suiciding in Australia, and that's a stat that's global, 2 per day. So you're like, and they'll tell you it's economic reasons. They're not paid enough. 100 years ago, a ton of wheat, a bushel of wheat, I don't know what a bushel and a ton is, but let's just say commiserately, it was $144, I think maybe a ton. And now 100 years plus later, it was $400, and now they're paid $144 for the same ton.
Australian dollars.
And yeah, well, look, that's what I'm saying. If I get all the dollars right, I'm just saying it's at least a half, if not more than a half, less than what they were paid 100 years ago. And people then come back with, oh, yeah, but they've got all these big machines now, and they don't, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, but 100 years of increased costs, and those machines are millions of dollars, and they need huge upkeep. There's no way a farmer is making money at all now. Like, they're just very few of them, unless they have to get bigger and bigger and bigger and get more and more of those machines to stay in the market. One of the farmers that I spoke to in Australia, in Western Victoria, not far from where I am, he's been on the farm. He's 6th generation. But when his grandfather, I'm not quite sure, was running the farm, there were 5 or 6 other families lived on the farm in their own houses, put their kids through school, worked. The land provided enough income for them to do that, to live on the land and work for them, and save up for their own land within 10 years. Just let you think about that economically. Now he has no help. His children work in the city. He would never let them work. They're not even interested in working on the farm. So everything he has to do is by himself. Yeah. Farm suicide, farm accidents are the highest in the world of all industries, because they're on their own. So you ask, why doesn't the farmer do anything? It's like, again, get off the farmer's back. We've got to be supporting them. Policy does not support farmers.
Which is really sad, because since we started our discussion, the main topic is we're talking about healthy soil, from where our food comes from, and that food goes into our body.
It's our survival.
Absolutely. And
it's our health, our survival, our future.
I do not understand why there is resistance from a government, from politicians, from industry leaders, of making a shift into sustainability farming, and it should be easier.
You've got to think about where a person's individual interests lie, and it isn't in going and getting their hands dirty out in a farm. And if it is, they're up against a sea of people they work with in the political sphere that's about serving themselves. And they, again, have no interest in those things. It sounds all
Or
philanthropic because they're not
yeah,
farmers. It's too disconnected.
I think governments and politicians need to basically do their very best to support farmers, you know, by implementing policies, by subsidizing some cost, by supporting them financially, because they run as well the risk with all the climate change. And sometimes you have too much water, too much rain, or drought. But in the same time, we ask ourselves, maybe out there is lobbyists that are working for the benefit of a big food industry corporation that support process and ultra processed food, which is cheap, easy to grab, nicely labeled. And I think the issue the Australian farmers are facing, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in
Yes.
Europe.
Oh,
It's in
absolutely.
United States. It's everywhere, and it's sad because we, as a species, human beings, we want clean water, clean air, and clean soil. These three things.
Yes. I will say one of the problems when you're talking from a policy point of view is people have been raised in an academic paradigm which thinks in
Mhm.
silos. So even when you say subsidise, Australia has 2% of its farmers are subsidised. In New Zealand, it's zero.
Zero.
We're the only countries in the world that don't subsidise our agriculture. But when you learn about what the agricultural subsidies are, they're prescriptive, like a recipe. And I've attended conferences with farmers saying, well, and it goes through their insurance. So they pay a tiny insurance thing, like $200 or
Mhm.
something, which insures against rain, flood, famine, whatever on the farm, let's just say. But they have to use chemical X, plant on day Y, do like it's
Yeah.
prescriptive. And when you're talking about putting in a ruling or a methodology or a policy, how do you do that for everybody? How do you do that around nature? How do you do that about things that are different for every single person? It's very hard from the policymaker's point of view, just as it is from the farmer's point of view to understand it. That's why carbon, from my viewpoint, is the go-to, the gold
Mhm.
standard, because you cannot grow carbon after a certain point. You can grow it to a certain point. You cannot
To
continue to
develop.
develop
Yeah.
it without biodiversity, without changing what you're doing. But you can do it to a certain level with the monocultural agriculture as we know
Mhm.
it that fits in, because it's very hard to change the farmer's mind just as it is the politicians. So it's not just one or the other. And you see COP, you may not know this, but
Mhm.
COP just recently finished last week, finally came on a little bit of a framework for the voluntary carbon market around the which is the first time. So the voluntary carbon market now has a bit of a framework. I think it's called Article 6 or something, or 6.4 or something. Anyway, the point is that's taken 29
Yes, but
years.
Samantha, hold on there. You said
Yeah.
framework. It took a
Framework,
last second
recipe,
to,
framework,
to
policy. They're all the
yes,
same things.
absolutely, which is a non-binding. At the end of the day, we are going around the circle on and on and on. And trust me, next year, next COP is going to be the same thing. Meaning, any country, any nation that does not follow what they agreed and signed off of, there is no consequence. And it will never
Well,
work.
there is a consequence. Let me just
Hmm.
tell you what it is. With the carbon thing, it's really a carbon tax any way you look at it, but you can call it anything you want. The way it changes is in the money market
Okay.
space, in the trading space, in the international trade. The reason the framework is there, it means that then all the people that are polluting, the shippers, the shipping industry and the aviation industry and the blah blah blah, all these big industries have to be working towards net zero. Well, they can then trade and buy the carbon
Hmm.
credits. When you are buying the carbon credits, is what I'm facilitating. I'm getting carbon credits from farmers who are developing them, and I'm selling them. Let's say I sell millions of them. I've got a couple of million to sell at the moment, and somebody wants them. If you've got a framework that my framework will fit in enough and it ticks the boxes, do they care how that is or what it does? No, just that they don't want to be
No.
litigated. So the reason at the moment everyone's pulling back is because There was no framework.
Mm-hmm.
People thought they were selling trees that weren't there, which measured by satellite. That's pretty cheap. And so, so everyone was, it's all bullshit. And it's not doing anything anyway. The car, it's all going out. It's all baby out with the bathwater. Not like, though there was a few bad players, maybe there was a lot of bad players. Oh, this is a good wicket. It's like Bitcoin, just like Bitcoin's a great technology, but there are always some bad players. And you can't wipe the whole thing out when it's starting, when you won't put up with the regulations. My point is we need the regulations so that there's something as a framework from which to go, because the thing that will change this is money. That's why I bag on it. You can see I'm passionate about human health and food, nutrition. I can talk to the cows come home about all those things. The only thing that will make a difference is money. And you've got to open that money market up. And so what if the big guys like BlackRock make billions and trillions off it? I don't care. As long as the money is moving to the farmer and they can now afford to actually grow food and the price of food doesn't go up because it's in this different paradigm. Wonderful. I think it's the only thing that's come along that has the possibility of being a solution for nature, that we pay for nature.
Let's hope. Let's shift to another topic. No, it's okay. Corporations are increasingly promoting their ESG commitments, but not all efforts are as genuine as they seem. Let's discuss the gap between promises or pledges and reality. How can consumers differentiate between authentic ESG efforts and corporate greenwashing?
Right. Well, I don't think the consumer is really in this discussion. This is a B2B thing, and it's about international trade and respect. So, for instance, ESG laws just came into Dubai July. And I think some countries have already got them in. They only affect corporations over a certain size. So the little guy and the consumer are kind of not even in the discussion. So when you ask how can they find it, I don't think they can. I don't think it's even relevant. At the moment, it's just, let's get this money moving. How can we do that? Well, the big guy, they have the threat of litigation on them. They've now got laws around that ESG stuff. So they can do a pledge to their consumers. That's not going to be their bit that'll get them. It's the auditors and the laws that governing they'll be able to be fined over it. That hasn't come in yet. Australia only gets ESG laws in January 25. So when those laws come in, and then you've got frameworks will be built that it'll be the trade between countries. If you don't have that in, you'll be fined. There's already countries that fine you if you haven't got your carbon credits, if you're not net zero, if you haven't worked out your protocol or reduced your carbon footprint before you go to buy it. So that means, they're going to go buy somewhere else, aren't they? Like, that's really where it is affected. It's behind the scenes. It's at a very big level. So I think it's $30 billion is being spent globally at the moment around ESG footprinting. That's not, they're not doing anything. It's just working out they don't even know what their footprint is. I mean, yes, you can go on your power bill and you can go, I've got this much carbon and how can I reduce it or change to renewables? That's what everybody knows about. There are a lot more things that can be done, but, at a starting point for the consumer to understand, they can look at their own power bill and have a look at what their carbon emissions is written on their bill. They can turn off so many lights, do this, and they can see how much more carbon they reduce by doing that. So if you want something very simple, that's about the way to look at it. But from an ESG point, between a pledge, I don't think a pledge, they're just going to get bit in the bum. Because when you put it into law, then you're making a statement that you've got to stand up against, and the lawyers rub their hands together. So that's what'll pull it together. Otherwise, it was just all philanthropic and PR and all that sort of stuff. Was that delineated?
Yeah. Are existing carbon offset programs effective in reducing emissions, or are they just more about meeting quotas?
Look, there are certainly in Australia. I really, really only know the Australian systems. So the Australian Carbon Credit Unit, ACU, was probably the first one created in the world that had the stringent measures around it. So even the trees are measured with tape measures around the diameter. You might monitor from satellite, but it's looked at on the ground. There's lots of auditing, third-party auditing, and you will be fined, and it's very, very onerous. In fact, it suits trees because you plant them, you put the work in the first couple of years, you see they get going. They kind of look after themselves and you don't cut them down. That suits a 25-year program. But when you're talking soil and you're saying you've got to keep the carbon in no matter what happens to the land in the next 25 years, and you're already 60 or 70 and your kids don't want to go on the land, you're just not going to do it. So I don't try and sell the government 25-year credit. I work with a commodity credit that's just being designed, and that's a 1-year credit. I look at it like a fractionalized 25 years, because every year the carbon gets measured. And so they're only, it's not about how long are you keeping it in. It's about what have you drawn down? What have you kept in the ground? Because it's very algorithmically known. It's slow getting carbon in the ground. You only got one growing season usually in a year in most parts of the world. So that's when your plant is photosynthesizing, and it's the photosynthesis that's taking the carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the ground. So it's pretty easy to measure.
And do you see any corporations truly leading by example in this space?
Yes, Patagonia. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't want to state that personally, because unless I'm privy to their books and can see, I will say that the carbon trading groups that I'm associated with are very nervous about litigation. And the execs now, because of all this stuff, they'll actually fly out from another part of the world and physically go and look at the land to check it is what it is. Whereas they used to just trust everything by Google or whatever. Now there's a lot more checking. And I think there's a lot of businesses that are not so public about it because they don't want the litigation. In fact, for a long time I was told, can you do it so we don't have our name on it? We don't want it to come back on us in case it proves to be wrong, because still it's a very new, nascent field. So even though I can say, hand on heart, this is doing it, I know it, I can see it, and I can give you all these stats and reasons why, the international market are really the ones buying, and they're very nervous for obvious reasons.
Let's go back to what we discussed earlier about soil health and human health. We know there is a growing awareness on how soil health directly impact the food we eat, and by extension our health. This connection is especially critical as chronic diseases rise globally, and there is so much noise a couple of months ago in the States on this topic. How does the quality of soil affect the nutrition of the food we consume?
Okay, well, I really will recommend my book at this point because it is a little bit complex. So let's just say that simple thing of the plant taking the atmospheric carbon out and turning it into, carbon in the ground, to making carbon of itself. Simply said, that's what it's doing. But in order to do it, just like running a race, it needs the minerals that are the building blocks to facilitate disease, health, prevention from disease, resilience, vitality, all those things, speed, whether it's a human or a plant or an animal. We're all getting it from the same minerals, which is in the soil. And the mechanism that is, you don't chew on rocks, and literally a plant doesn't either. We all rely on the microbes and fungi in the soil to translate that rock mineral into what's called a colloidal or liquid form, which it then drinks through its roots. And that is done by microbes, particularly mycorrhizal fungi, which is a type of fungi which wraps itself around the roots. So it's a bit complex, but I will say that because of the chemicals that we use, we destroy that relationship. So therefore, you've got to put a fertilizer on because it can't make it itself. Does that make sense?
It does.
So
And what role can regenerative farming play in combating chronic diseases linked to poor diets?
So again, it doesn't matter what the term is. Doesn't matter if you say organic, regenerative, or conventional farms. it's all about what is the farmer doing on their piece of land. Have they got carbon in the ground? Are those fungi in the ground doing the work? And if they are, then those minerals will be translated into the plant. The plant will take them up to the animal, maybe you eat the animal. So I have got various things that describe exactly what I'm saying. But in a nutshell, a disease, no matter what the disease is usually a deficiency of some description, which it makes the body's ability to fight it not there. No, it needs the tools. So if they're not there in your diet, in the food, even if you're eating the cleanest food, it may not be in the soil because the soil didn't have it. I mean, geologically, it may not have the minerals you need. So you might need to have something like salt licks with boron. I'll give you an example. Boron is a type of mineral which, my understanding, if you don't have a very small amount of it, but let's say you've got zero amount, you'll have failed pregnancies in sheep. So they'll either not get pregnant or throw the animal or whatever. So, but you only need a teaspoon for a hectare. Too much boron and the animals die. So it's a tiniest little bit. So it's microns. And I think maybe, I don't know with the agronomics now, but agronomy has always been taught really about how to handle chemicals. It's really a chemical education as opposed to understanding. It's more about understanding the entire spectrum of how the soil is working and how that then translates into you will be healthy based on how healthy the animals are. So to give you an example, somebody doing one of these carbon projects, they've managed to increase the amount of animals that they can run on the same piece of land like 800%. And they're getting live birth, twins where they didn't get them before, like just all of the factors which say that means they're only getting it from the soil. And they're only getting it because he's encouraging the native weeds, he's working with the land and listening to it, and the animals are responding to that in their resounding health.
Yeah, yeah. Samantha, you worked closely with farmers and businesses. What has been the most rewarding part of your work working with these individuals?
Well, I think it's the light coming on. Like people go, oh,
We didn't know that.
Like
this is new.
We didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. I suppose because it is actually so simple.
And is it genuine when they?
Yeah, when they get it, when the penny drops, when they stop being like this. It's when you do your talk and they're all like this. You what? Oh, they go like this. You're waiting for the body language. It's all in the body language. So, yeah. I think I've had people go, that's amazing. They suddenly get it because you suddenly go, it's so logical that, of course, all of it is related. There is no separation. People go on and on in changing the story. Oh, it's about water. Oh, it's about biodiversity. Oh, it's about carbon. Oh, stop talking about carbon. That's just a reason for people to pollute. And that's a reason for people to do this and do that. Oh,
and have you witnessed any breakthrough moments that give you hope for the future?
Well, we had a little bit of a story, didn't we, about how I gave my book to somebody on a plane. And that was really a very epiphanic moment for me, having that farmer read a book after 30 years and say, as a farmer, I didn't think I could learn anything from the land. That was really exciting for me. So I would say yes. And I would say, look, I haven't really got the soil buyer across the line yet because these rules and regulations made by the academics, and also because there's always charlatans. And yes, there's just as many farmers out there that will take you for a ride as there are businesses, like the business people at the end of the day. There's good and bad and everything in between. So I understand the need for rules, but it's very, very difficult to get either side across the line. But there is small indications of it. It is, and I hope with this COP changing, there will be, because there is a little bit of framework there now. It's tiny, but there's a little bit. And I hope people like Jeremy Clarkson, who do such a wonderful job on that Clarkson show, Farm.
He does, and it's authentic.
He's just so wonderful. I love him. I loved Jamie Oliver when he came out and tried to talk to those
Hmm.
kids and they were just eating chips. And I followed all that. I thought, oh, these people, they're wonderful. They work so hard because it's such huge populations and so much PR and so much work to do that. What they do, people go on about their celebrity. Oh, there's a celebrity. I'm like, oh, good on you, mate. It's hard
Since we're
work.
talking about that, how is the food quality at schools in Australia?
We don't have school lunches. We
Okay.
make our own school
So there
lunches.
is a packed lunch boxes for the kids.
Pack lunch boxes. And I would say, as a person who did everything from
Mm.
scratch, my kids later told me that they threw my lunches out every
Oh,
day in order to swap with the junk lunches
ah,
that every other
yeah.
kid had because the kid wanted to have their lunch. And I was making chicken schnitzels with bread that I bought organically and made my own crumbs and cooked them up each day. And they were like,
So for
ugh.
sure you had
They wanted,
very interesting arguments with
they
your
wanted
kids
cheese.
about smoke.
Well, they didn't tell me till they were now adults. They hid it from me. I was so passionate about it. The last thing they were going to do. The funniest one I have about that is that on a Friday night, I'd let my partner and their dad, and them do soft drink and pizza on a Friday
Mhm.
night. That was my only concession. Otherwise, there was
Yeah.
nothing
So
in
that
my
was like
house.
a treat.
That was the
Yeah.
treat, right? Pizza and soft drink on
Hmm.
a Friday night. The boys watching
Hmm.
television. They were having a boys' night. That was
Hmm.
fine. And then I found my little one. They thought they were so clever, but they were putting up because I wouldn't let them keep the pizza if they couldn't get through it all. And they had leftover pizza. They were hiding it in their school bag. I
Oi,
mean, old
oi, oi,
pizza
oi.
in the bag, in the backpack. Remember, they're like six,
Oh,
5 and 6 years old or something. And of course, what do they think cleans the bags out? I open the bag. Oh, it's
yeah,
genial. They were so happy with themselves. They'd snuck it past me in the school bag.
yeah,
Last thing I wanted to do was look in those school
yeah,
bags.
yeah. Let's talk about the books, the children books. You've written children books about soil health, translated, I believe, into 7 languages. Unique way to inspire future generations. What led you to take this path, Samantha?
Well, obviously, because I had
Mm,
kids. And I was really just
mm,
like, oh, if I can't get the adults to listen, maybe I can get the kids to
mhm.
listen and show their parents. Like, literally, I thought maybe I'd get the farmer's pet to listen through their children. So I was trying to get it into schools, and I just had no idea how difficult it was to get a book into schools.
Especially talking about this
It's
complex topic,
wildly political.
because soil
I know.
health for little ones, it's not an easy topic. Huh?
Yeah, but UCI had come up with this
Hmm.
idea, and I based it on the Alice in Wonderland
Okay.
down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
chasing the rabbit down
Yeah.
the hole. And literally, I've used that theme through. You heard me mention it in the
Hmm.
conversation at the beginning, and my parents had the Lewis Carroll Alice in Wonderland theme as that I grew up with on the walls in the family restaurant for the children's
Hmm.
parties, and so I used the theme of the story, and I got permission. I was allowed to do that, and I had based the whole story on that down the rabbit hole, and I was trying to do a children's education program around it. And then I just did this story that Alice was sitting in just playing with herself with a dog, and she hears a
Hmm.
sound, and it's around her granny's compost pile, and the microbe is awakened, becomes magical with her singing because she's
Hmm.
singing, and it's all this sort of pun on wavelengths and stuff. But she basically the microbe teaches her and takes her on this journey, and she learns about the Gaia, the earth, the interconnected web of the earth through this mycorrhizal fungi, through that. And then she goes back and she does, anyway, there's a story, children's
Hmm.
story. And so the story is, the first one is, that story is actually the 10-year-old one. So, and I drew the little Alice character, and my partner was a drawer,
Hmm.
an artist as well. So we did all the drawings. And then he transcribed the more complex story into a simple one, painted. We worked on the text to be very simple. And then, but it was all derived from all the study I'd
Hmm.
done. So I wrote, the first one was Elegant Solutions for Addressing Climate Change. And I wanted to make it like a very simple guidebook. You could just pick up a chapter anywhere and read it, not consecutively. So it was kind of along the sort of simple principles that are in those 10 chapters, community and wavelengths, and I was talking about spectrums and things like that from, back then. And then the children's books were taking those principles and using the Alice in Wonderland theme to communicate it. So
yeah,
I think
in
they
that
work.
story, I guess the hero was Alice, and who was the villain?
The villain was our ignorance.
Okay.
So the farmers in the story are having to leave the land because the land is failing. And so they're all having their men's discussions about it. And she runs into it and says she knows that they're going to have to leave and live in the city, which they don't want to do. And because the land is failing. So, and the microbe is teaching her, well, we're dying and this is why we're dying. And so the discussion with the microbe and the Gaia, the network of microbes, fungi, is to say, we've given up on you because you're not listening to us. Because the listening discussion is really around the intuitive stuff, which is lost through the Indigenous peoples. And I think we tend to think it all having to be, the way the hippies all talk about it and taking drugs and ayahuasca and all that sort of stuff to communicate. But actually, we are all animals and we all have that biofeedback with the land. We just don't realize we have it. And I was trying to sort of bring that back to the fact that you child, that's just sitting there doing your thing with your dog singing, or having a little fun time, have the magic of life around you. And so she inspires the men talking, and she gets the magic mushroom. I know it's a bit of a pun on that because everyone's into all that stuff, and then she pours the water with the microbes into this dying pot plant, and it comes alive in front of them, and they're all amazed by it. And she says, this is why it is, because of what she's learned from this mother mushroom. So she's communicating this story back through out of the mouths of babes. It's kind of, that's the concept around the story.
Nice.
So I'm not trying to get into the complexity of how it all works, but I do touch on it in there. So there's this sort of way a child hopefully can understand it. And I've had a few kids read them, not a lot. As I say, my marketing's less than
great. And what
great.
sort of feedback you got from kids or maybe the parents?
Parents are amazed by them. They're just like, oh, I just didn't know. Children are like, it's logical to them. It's simple. So, read them. Tell me what you think.
The process of writing these books and translating translating them to 7 languages.
I paid translators, and the hardest part was that the eldest book I wanted it to have lots of pictures, and all those pictures have diagrams, and every diagram has a label. So I'd have to get a person that translated but also could do InDesign, because I did them all in Adobe InDesign. And most of them couldn't do that. They'd say they could do it because you'd get them on all these language translations. They could all translate, but none of them would do that. And I couldn't do the layout because I didn't know the language. So they had to be able to put it into my page in the right spot. So anyway, that was how I did it. It was a long, arduous, and very expensive process.
And putting the ideas together within that process, was it an easy task from, let's say, the beginning of the story to the end, to the editing, which most of the time it takes, it's kind of complicated?
I would say maybe because I'm an artist, I find the creation part very easy. Because I'm an artist, I'm not a linear thinker. I don't think, like, I watch my son, he can write an essay and get an A, and he hasn't even reread it. I can take an hour and a paragraph. I'm almost dyslexic. I can put things together in a way nobody else sees, but I'm not very good in a straight line. So I have to work with editors, and they'll say, "What were you saying this?" I say, "Oh, you can write it much better like this." And I go, "Oh." So I actually love the AIs and
Mhm.
stuff, even though you're going to do a paragraph at a time. I write the paragraph and then they it'll rewrite it and you'll go, you've missed the main point. They hallucinate. Did you know the AIs hallucinate? It's just like they put in something completely crazy there. So you've got to reread
Yeah.
everything, but it will say it grammatically correct. And, and then you've got to put your human feel back into it. It's a bit of work
Yeah.
actually, but that's tedious,
Yeah.
that part of it. But then, I've done 2-ton marble carvings and the blocking it out's pretty quick. And then the polishing is years. It's so much
Yeah.
work.
Great. Great. The sports industry has a surprising connection with soil health.
Everything
Absolutely.
does.
Because maybe our listeners, they
Nutrition.
wonder what's the link between what we're talking about soil health and sports industry. Well, there is a connection through nutrition of our athletes and the sustainability of its operation. Let's explore how these areas intersect. How does soil quality, Samantha, indirectly influence the performance of athletes through the food they consume?
Well, it's that thing that I was saying with taking nutrients. What people don't really get the significance of is that nature does it better than anything you can put in a pill.
Hmm.
You can hype it up, but then you become dependent on it just to survive. And the point being, you want to get so that you can be your best with nothing, and then you add to it. So you're you're increasing that, tweaking it at the end. Like I actually knew somebody that was the breath coach of
Hmm.
Federer, and you wouldn't know he had a breath coach, but he would win games on just her tweaking, him not breathing through his mouth and breathing through his nose, and how to do that. And it was quite fascinating because I had her education, so I would then be fascinated to watch. Oh, he really is doing that. That's really fascinating. So it's like, I think with a high athlete, you are looking for nuances, and it's not a nuance to get food that's got the most amount of nutrients in it, and that will only come from very good soil. So you could be buying it organically and it's still got no nutrients in it because it's not grown in a good soil. But you've got things that tell you've got a nose and taste and feel, and you actually intuitively feel things. If you get good at it, you can start to open your vehicle, your tool, to the food in front of you. They did a test many years ago with, I don't know, 200 babies, and they just put this smorgasbord of food out in front of them, and the babies all reached for things that their bodies were actually nutrient needing, in the same way they say pregnant women will eat these weird things when they're pregnant. So your body intuitively knows what you need to eat, but if you're not getting access to any food that's got any of that nutrients in it, then you might need to take up a little bit of gardening. I mean, you can grow herbs and things very simply, and getting those nutrients into the soil is pretty
Yeah.
critical. Too high.
What can sports organizations learn from sustainable farming practices?
Um, well, again, it's the sustainable. I wouldn't use the word sustainable. I would say the regenerative and organic agricultural practices, where you've got that carbon-rich soil, is going to give them an edge. And if they can, it'll put off injury. It'll give them the building blocks that their bodies can then, because they're already building the muscles. But, you see things like you'd see during the COVID thing, you keep hearing these, young, fit, healthy men just had a heart attack and dropped dead. And you go, well, why did one do that and another one didn't to the same vaccine? And I'm not making any comment about the vaccine, but I would say it was an alien introduced thing into the body. And if the body isn't given enough robust resilience, like the armor for the wars, like you've got to give it stuff from which to battle stuff. And so that's where those micronutrients which are in the soil that maybe are not, like let's say vitamin C, we're one of the only animals on the planet. I think there's 3 animals. There's us, the toucan, and one other thing that doesn't produce vitamin C in our body. We have to eat it. I mean, you wouldn't, who'd know, right? And we all know that when you've got a cold, you're going to take vitamin C, and what foods have got good vitamin C in them. But if you do look at any of the studies, you'll find that a lot of fruit and vegetables that have got like this tiny percentage of what was a recommended daily allowance of a vitamin. It's just not in the food anymore when you test it, because it's not, the minerals are not in the soil, or maybe they are, but the mycorrhizal fungi that translates those minerals into the plant is not there. And so even if you're eating a healthy diet, so I would say really look at the fruit and vegetables and walk into a market. Let's say you've got a market somewhere and it's got 50 fruit and vegetables. Maybe you like capsicums. I don't know. Walk around, if capsicums high in vitamin C, and you walk around and see what you feel like. Let your body tell you what you feel like. And then, buy one from each different stall, mark it for yourself, and then taste it, eat it. What does it taste like? Does it burst in your mouth with flavor? Those flavonoids and things are related to the minerals. So you've got actually biofeedback stuff in your body. You just got to train yourself to open up and listen to it.
Great. Thank you for that. I think now it's time for our lightning round.
Lightning round. Haven't we covered everything we've been going for an hour?
You ready for speedy Q&A?
I'm ready. I'm going to say.
Your favorite place to find peace in nature?
Oh, my deck out in the bush. I've got 58 acres of bushland, and I like just sitting on the deck and watching the sunset or having coffee, listening to the birds. There's so many birds out where my property is, because I'm in the middle of the bush. So I cannot tell you how wonderful it is.
Yeah. Your favorite way to unwind after a busy day or a busy week?
If I can, it's just sit and be with my kids if they're around. Otherwise, it would be to sit in my garden in the city here, or maybe have a drink outside, glass of wine.
Any particular wine?
I'm pretty partial to a Shiraz.
Okay. Australian?
Poor brick Shiraz, pretty good from the Ross Valley.
Yeah, nice. An item you can travel without?
Probably my earpods these days.
The biggest misconception about soil carbon?
I don't know that there is a misconception. Yes, the biggest misconception I would say is that because the agronomic field has been measuring this much, like 6 centimeters or 10 centimeters, which is just all they need for the root systems of crops, there is a global viewpoint that it can't work because they're only measuring that deep. Even when they do soil carbon, they tend to only measure that deep, like maybe a foot at best, or 30 centimeters. And that's nuts, because carbon can go meters into the ground. So that's probably the single biggest problem, because they'll come out and say, you cannot solve the climate problem with soil carbon alone. We've done the measurements, and they've done them on 30 centimeters. And it just isn't going to, no, of course, because the top 30 centimeters is cycling in and out with the atmosphere. So, yes, that's what's almost called label carbon. And some of us dieharders would say you almost need to omit that in the carbon measurement, because that's not the sequestered carbon part. It's part of it. It's the pathway in. But once you open the pathways, it can keep going deeper.
Coffee or tea?
Morning coffee only, afternoon tea only.
Yeah. If you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who would it be and why?
A historical figure would be Einstein, because he seems to have been both inquisitive, grounded, and aware of the value of family and groundedness, despite wild extremes of reaching out into the universe. And I would probably talk to him about ideas in that area, because I love what he thought about.
What's the worst career advice you ever gotten? Or let's say the best. the best career advice.
Find a passion that pays.
Okay. One habit that keeps you grounded.
One habit that keeps me grounded, again, it's two. It's nature and family, maybe together or apart. Either of them does the same thing.
Samantha Jewel, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sid. It's been really an interesting conversation. I always learn more, even when I'm speaking.
And before we wrap up, could you share with our listeners the best ways to connect with you and learn more about your work?
So if anybody's interested to follow me, there's a number of ways you can. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Samantha Jewel. Pretty much post or share something every day around this area. Also, if you're interested in my books or reading, I've got books in 7 languages for children, 5, 10 and 13 plus on the subject about solving the climate through things that they can do at samjewel.com, and I have a new book out, which we've just spoken about. Other than that, I also have for farmers, I've got earth.io, urth.io, for anybody interested in learning about soil carbon for their farm and how they might be able to trade it and make money from it. And other than that, I've got other things, but that's more than enough.
Fantastic. Samantha, thank you for sharing your incredible journey and insights. It's inspiring to see how soil health connects to so many aspects of our lives: climate, food, and even sports performance. For those who want to learn more, you can visit samjewel.com and earth.io, and we will leave the links on our episode show notes. I leave you with a few words from Franklin Roosevelt. The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. Thank you for tuning in to the Prisoner Sports Talk podcast. Until next time, keep striving for change. Bye-bye.
When life shows